Welcome everybody to Curious Formula. I'm Curious Formula, your moderator, your host, and we're talking about Joe Biden today. Unless your head has been buried in a pound of sand as an ostrich, you do know the fact that Joe Biden today, President Joe Biden, has dropped out of the race. He is no longer seeking the 2024 Democratic nomination. And as the presumptive nominee, that means he is also not going to be on the ballot for the general election in November. It is the first time a sitting Democratic president has resigned the presidency before an election since Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1968. And in that race, we had a year difference between when he announced that he was not running and a full primary season with him not being on the ballot for the Democratic Party to pick their candidate of that year. We have no such time as we speak right now. We're talking about less than 120 days before the general election, so we are in unprecedented waters going forward. What has happened? We're going to talk about some things that has happened and some things that I have a lot of them, so take notes. But before we do that, please make sure you like and comment and subscribe here on my YouTube channel. Please make sure you go to my TikTok channel, Curious_Formula, and subscribe, like, and comment there as well. So let's jump right into it. First things first, let's talk about things that I think about. I think we ought to thank Joe Biden, President Joe Biden, for what he's been able to accomplish with a divided Congress in a world where political obstacle and filibustering and downright just not supporting things because of ideological differences has reached an all-time high. We ought to thank Joe Biden for not only what he's been able to do, but for the things he proposed. But for those people who always say to me, what has Joe Biden done? What has he done? I'm going to tell you what I'm going to thank Joe Biden for. I'm going to thank Joe Biden for the Inflation Reduction Act, which is generating $1.7 trillion in U.S. investments. I'm going to thank Joe Biden for the CHIPS Act, which has created more than 84,000 jobs thus far. I want to thank him for the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, already starting more than 40,000 projects, yes, in infrastructure redevelopment. I want to thank Joe Biden for the 201 federal judges who will protect our rights, including our first African-American woman to sit on the Supreme Court. I'm going to thank Joe Biden for his bipartisan gun reform and the first office of gun violence prevention. I'm going to thank him for forgiving $150 billion in student debt for 4 million borrowers. I'm going to thank him for collecting $500 billion extra for millionaire and billionaire tax cheats. I'm going to thank him for the unemployment below 4% for the longest stretch in 50 years. I'm going to thank him for adding 700,000 new construction jobs. I'm going to thank him for the record level of new small businesses created. Thank him for the largest ever investment to fight climate change and to cut pollution by 50% by 2030. Thank him for issuing a ruling to cut methane emissions by 80%. I'm going to thank him for preserving more than 24 million acres of land for conservation. I'm going to thank him for renewable energy that surpassed coal for the first time ever. I'm going to thank him for capping prescription drug prices for seniors and insulin at $35 a month. I'm going to thank him for expanding veterans health care through the PACT Act. I'm going to thank him for expanded overtime for employees making under $55,000 a year. I'm going to thank him for approving over-the-counter birth control for the first time. I'm going to thank him for reforming the Electoral Count Act to prevent another January 6th. I'm going to thank him for pardoning thousands of people convicted of marijuana possession. I'm going to thank him for requiring cash refunds for canceled flights. I'm going to thank him for connecting 10 million households to Wi-Fi. I'm going to thank him for funding 14,000 mental health professionals in schools. If you don't know, you better ask somebody. Second thing I think is that Kamala Harris gets a redo. Folks, as an elected official who has run races and lost races, I can't tell you how sometimes the races that we lose, we replay in our minds over and over and over again about what we do differently. As many of you may know and may not know, I ran unsuccessfully for Congress in 2012 in New Jersey. 2-month race, normally a 6-month race. But I think all the time in that losing race, what I could have done differently, what I could have done to make me win that race or perform even better than I actually did. Folks, Kamala Harris gets a redo. Yes, a redo from that horrible campaign she ran in 2020 where she raised lots of money, never really put out a vision that people could grab hold to talk about what she planned on doing in the next 4 years and where she was going to take this nation. And she had spent her money all by December. She didn't even make it. She had to quit the race in December of that year because she couldn't even make it. In 2019, she couldn't make it to 2020, never got to stand before the voters in Iowa, New Hampshire, or North South Carolina because she ran out of money. It was a dreadful campaign. But I know for 4 years she has thought about what she could have done differently. Well, she gets her time right now. And I will tell you, politicians who get a second chance, who get a chance to go before the lights one more time, who get to stand before the mic and on top of the bully pulpit one more time to make an effort, they can either shrink under that light or they can show themselves ready for the times that they find themselves in, rising to the occasion and being a profile of courage. Kamala Harris, this is your profile of courage opportunity, and I think as somebody who has prepared all that she has within her life, professionally and otherwise, that she will rise to that occasion, and at least she has the opportunity to do so. The third thing I think is that the vice presidential choice to join on the ticket will be a white male governor, preferably somebody from the South that has executive leadership experience. Who am I talking about? I'm talking specifically about people like Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, who just won re-election by a large margin, interestingly enough, over the son-in-law of Mitch McConnell in a very red state. I'm thinking of Governor Cooper, Democrat from North Carolina, a purple state, who was term limited in the same way that former Governor Mike Pence got to join the Trump campaign as the VP because his term was ending. So might be the same factor with Governor Cooper possibly joining a Harris ticket. Even someone like a Governor Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, a more moderate white male who can then be unleashed in these battleground states and in these states that should not be battleground states. I think there's going to be a whole rejiggering of it because in the same way that Joe Biden joined an Obama ticket in 2008 to do exactly that for his candidacy and it made the difference, so can one of these gentlemen in a race supporting Kamala Harris as her VP and her second. The fourth thing I think is that polling by Friday is going to show us a lot of new territory here. Folks, if Kamala Harris continues to rack up the endorsements that I know she's racking up today, we should have fresh, new, complete numbers from a number of pollsters, some good, some bad, some indifferent, that will come out by Friday. And folks, if it shows this race is still tight, that it's still 44 to 43, and she's within 4, then it's a new race, and this is a race that's winnable. Yes, sorry, Trumpers, even with us in 120 days, if Kamala Harris is still getting the numbers that Joe Biden got against Donald Trump, which was essentially a dead heat, but he had no place else to go, she will have a lot of places to go that I will talk about later. It is a new race. The fifth thing I think about is that Trump world needs to be worried. I know you guys are popping collars. I know you're popping the bubbly. You're saying, hey man, we're gonna win this election now. We are sailing on easy street. Well, let me tell you why that's necessarily not true. Now, a lot of this is predicated on the Democrats getting it right. And to be frank, the Democrats haven't gotten a whole lot right the last year, definitely not in the last few weeks since the debate. And so you can always count on us to making a lot of really, really fundamental mistakes. But if Democrats get it right, why should Trump world be a little nervous and be a little worried? I'll tell you why. Because Donald Trump gave a bad convention speech. That's one reason. What am I talking about? After the assassination attempt, and we all should be thankful to God that assassination attempt was unsuccessful. We are glad that we are not solving our differences with violence, because that is never acceptable in the public sector and is never acceptable in terms of our elections. But Donald Trump had the world's sympathy. He definitely had the sympathy of most voters in the U.S. And he could have used this convention and used this convention speech as somebody who had just had his life threatened as an opportunity to open us up to talking about a vision for a big tent, a vision for the next 4 years that was inclusive of everyone, and present us a worldview that would get some of us who are worried on the Democratic side, definitely the independents and the Republicans in this party who are really feeling the heat about this party becoming the Donald Trump's party, MAGA world, and not the regular Ronald Reagan conservative Republican Party that we've known and our parents knew going forward, going back to 1980. He didn't do that. He gave a speech that was 12 minutes in empathy, and it was another 90 minutes in red meat MAGA rally speech, and that is not what independents want to hear. And because of that, his bounce going forward, and we're still measuring that bounce, is not going to be much more than 3 to 4%, and that's not a big bounce that you should be getting, particularly when the base is so tight at 40% and 40% or 44% and 44%. He needed to expand it. He did not do it with that speech. Also, I mentioned, as I said, the bump will be not that big. You want to get 2 to 5 percentage points is a decent bump coming out of the convention. Something of plus 6 or 7 is incredible. He is not getting that bump, and it's because the convention was every bit as weird, every bit as negative and really made people's vision about what America could be dark. It wasn't hopeful. It wasn't optimistic, and it was not inclusive, and that's why the bump was not that big. Donald Trump still has not hit 50% against Joe Biden, and that was a weakened Joe Biden. The Republicans said he was basically a vegetable, that he was cognitively out of it, that he might have been having Alzheimer's, showing Alzheimer's. Even with that, and with the subsequent appearances that he's made that weren't that great, he still did not get to 50%. It is still a volatile campaign where almost 50% of the population is saying they don't know who they're going to vote for yet. The next thing I'm telling you why Trump world needs to be worried is you only have 100 days to hit at Kamala Harris. Yes, I know you've done some hitting beforehand, but you know doggone well that your campaign in 50 states was going to be predicated on hammering Joe and hammering Kamala Harris as the VP. Now you have new air, and we haven't had the Democratic convention yet. We don't know who the VP might be. So you're going to have less time to go negative with this candidate than you probably had with any candidate who's run for president nationally ever. You've never only had 100 days to make a real concerted effort to go negative against them, and that's going to actually work against Republican efforts in terms of the party and in terms of putting a winning strategy together. The new ticket may also capture the magic formula that's going to take to win even in less than 120 days. Yes. How is that going to happen? Well, the election paradigm. So let me go into that a little bit. So there's Trump supporters who now say, look, getting a new candidate, getting a new ticket in 120 days, less than 120 days, that's impossible. You're never going to be able to sell a candidate that quickly to that many people to win an election against a guy who's already getting 44% of the vote. Why is that possible, and how can that actually happen? I'll tell you why. One is the election paradigm has been fractured and not the same since 2016. Folks, how many, let me ask you a simple question. Did anyone think that Donald Trump would beat Hillary Clinton in 2016 90 days before the election? 60 days before the election? How about 30 days before the election? 2 weeks? 1 week? Maybe 4 or 5 days before the election, the numbers were starting to show that maybe Donald Trump had Hillary Clinton in trouble. Maybe. But people still said, common wisdom was that she was going to win that race. We've not had a normal election since 2016. The second thing is a way that this could actually happen is America did not want Joe Biden or Donald Trump. That's why they're stuck at 40-something%. It's the base of their parties that's why none of them got to 50%, right? And my point is that one of those candidates is going by the wayside. There was actually the two candidates that nobody wanted, one of those candidates is gone. And that's going to embolden a new ticket and new opportunities that heretofore did not exist against a Donald Trump. Think about a new team where age is not the issue anymore, except for one candidate, Donald Trump. Think about it when gaffes and lies and untruths are emanating from one candidate, Donald Trump. And think about having an aged person who has high negatives and whose major policies are not supported by the majority of voters that are saying they're going to vote in this election, and your opponent actually embodies 65% support on these issues. That's how this is going to potentially happen. What it does is a new ticket actually brings into question the unity that the Republican Party has. As you know, if you follow my content here, I've often told you that 15% of Republicans don't want Donald Trump. You saw that in the latter primaries of the Republican nomination fight, where Nikki Haley, whose name was on the ballot but not running anymore, got 15% of the primary vote in Indiana, and then 15% again in Maryland. And then she won the District of Columbia vote. Now, granted, these are more moderate places, right? But Indiana's it's a conservative state, okay? Maryland, at least amongst the Republican primary voters, is pretty conservative. Just look to who ran for governor against Wes Moore just 2 years ago to identify as that. And so there's a 50% of Republicans who, even after the Trump convictions, said that not only were they not voting with Donald Trump, they said he should drop out the race. That's that same 15%. And if you think they were emboldened by the MAGA takeover of the Republican Party as I said in my content here, the party of Ronald Reagan, Reagan Republicanism is dead. And Don Jr. said that himself, that this was the party of Trump. If you don't think those voters, those Nikki Haley voters, those Chris Christie voters, those voters who was talking to the the Biden campaign before his debate debacle, those never Trumpers, if you don't think they're going to make a concerted effort to leave him now, that there's an alternative and a new choice other than Joe Biden, then you're mistaken. And that fractures not only Donald Trump's ability within his own party, but it also makes him more attractive to independents. A new team stops Trump from winning independents and increases them turnout. So now you're having that 15% of Republicans who are looking for an alternative coming over to a new ticket. Now you have enthusiasm. Remember, if you watch my content, I told you both Joe Biden and Donald Trump had two mountains they had to climb, right? Donald Trump had to win independents or he would lose the general election, right? The only reason why he beat Hillary Clinton in 2016 is because of independents. And Republicans and Donald Trump has never won independents since that election. Indeed, the 2022 red wave never happened because Republicans did not win the independent vote. Folks, Donald Trump didn't lose 2020 because of voter fraud. He lost because he didn't win independents like he did in 2016. And again, and he had an opportunity to reach out to them at the convention during his convention, during his speech. He did not do that. Now with a new team, where independents are looking for an alternative, you now have an alternative that ain't Joe Biden, right? It now increases the Dem turnout because Joe Biden's mountain that he had to climb was that he had to increase turnout. He had to have the same turnout in 2024 that he had in 2020, and he was getting nowhere near that. He was, again, stuck like Donald Trump was in the 40s. He couldn't get the 50% because of the enthusiasm gap. Well, you're going to have a new ticket, and there's a potential to get an enthusiasm gap closer with that. Now, listen, that's still a long shot. If you're an even money bettor right now, you're going to bet the house, not the house, but you're going to bet that Donald Trump is even money to win election and be the next president. That's the way the numbers are trending at this point. You know how I feel about polling, that it's not sacrosanct, it's not demonstrative. It is just a part of a greater number of things you look at when judging how a candidate is doing and who will win. I learned that from Alan Lichtman, former professor at American University. Shout out to the guy who's never miscalled an election for president. He was my professor at American University. Shout out to the Eagles. But the reality is that we now have a new play here, and Democrats could mess this up, right? They got to pick the right ticket. They got to pick the right person to be with Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris has to rise to the occasion, going to my third point about things that I think about. It's still a long shot, but it is a shot, and it's a shot that could actually materialize and be real in less than 120 days. Subscribe, like, and comment below. Thank y'all for rocking with me. Make sure you write a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you have to say about this. If you have alternative ideas and alternative thoughts, be free to share them with me. Subscribe, like, and comment. Go to my TikTok channel, Curious_Formula. Subscribe, like, and comment there as well. I thank you for rocking with me. Tell me what you think. We're going to be doing this daily because every day I think we're going to find something to do that we got to talk about in this respect here. Stay curious. Thank you for rocking with me. And think. It ain't illegal yet.